The press digest, we're going to take a quick browse over the main dailies, Al-Ahram and Al-Akhbar, and the opposition papers. And I guess, Andrea, will start off with Al-Akhbar.
Indeed, Dean, of course, most of the headlines today were about the Supreme Constitutional Court regarding the Shura Council, of course, and the Constitutional Assembly. And the first banner we take a look at is Al-Akhbar, which reads, dissolving the Shura Council as soon as a new parliament is elected, its legislative authority does continue. The law of the Constitutional Assembly is invalid and the new constitution is valid. The authority of the Assembly exceeds all powers. The emergency law is unconstitutional and the President has no right to permit arrests or any searches.
Right, and also the same issue was in the main banners in Al-Masri Al-Yum, and we read, invalidate but with suspension. The Supreme Constitutional Court postpones the dissolving of the Shura Council till the new elected parliament convene. The presidency says, and I quote, it will continue in its legislative task, annulling the criteria of electing the constitutional panel, restricting Morsi's powers in the emergency law. Civilians and revolutionists say a hope to get rid of Morsi. The Islamists say the Constitutional Court creates strife. And a surprise visit by Begetu to the courthouse, and the minister says, I wanted to obtain a copy of the court ruling. Egypt's highest court ruled on Sunday that the nation's legislature and constitutional panel were illegally elected. The ruling of the Supreme Constitutional Court said that legislature upper house, the only one currently sitting, would not be dissolved until the parliament's lower chamber is elected later this year or early 2014. Egypt's highest court on Sunday invalidated the Senate and a panel that drafted the constitution. And we have a report coming up featuring what's happening, and we'll come back to you, so stay tuned.
Egypt's highest court on Sunday invalidated the Senate and a panel that drafted the constitution. The Supreme Constitutional Court said the law governing the elections of the Shura Council was unconstitutional, as were the rules for the selection of the members of a committee that drafted the constitution. Presiding Judge Meher al-Bahiri said that the Shura Council should remain in place until the election of a new parliament. Despite the ruling, the presidency said the Shura Council would maintain its powers until a new lower house is elected later this year. As for the constitution, it will remain in place because it was adopted by popular referendum. The text, which was criticized by opponents of President Mohamed Morsi for failing to represent all Egyptians, was adopted by a popular referendum in December, marked by low voter turnout. Sunday's ruling casts a dark shadow over the legitimacy of the Shura Council and the constitutional panel. The constitution was at the heart of a conflict between Morsi's supporters and his opponents, who slammed the text for stifling freedoms and for not being inclusive. Politicians who had boycotted the constitutional panel say they feel vindicated by the ruling. The case against the Shura Council is based on several challenges by lawyers of the law that govern the election of its members. Both upper and lower houses were elected under the same electoral law, which last year deemed invalid, prompting the dissolution of Parliament. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're still with you on this morning's edition of The Breakfast Show. And we go back to Al-Akhbar newspaper, where we read the Renaissance Dam before the President and the different parties today. The President invites political parties and movements for a meeting to tackle the means of dealing with the case of the Renaissance Dam. Seniors concerned parties warned against announcing the report of the dam committee. A member of the committee says Egypt suggested establishing the dam on phases and storing water over a period of 20 years. Experts say 500,000 fidans will be submerged in the area of mining gold and relocating 30,000 people from the site of the dam. A Noor party asked the President to call for a national dialogue regarding the tackling the outcome of the Renaissance Dam. And engineer Ahmed Shinawi, former Minister of Water Resources, says that the dam may collapse because it is built from concrete, which is in a seismically active area.
Right, and also the same issue came about in Al-Masri Al-Yum paper, and we read the Islamists and the opposition meet today to discuss the crisis of the Renaissance Dam. Morsi is to present the report of the Trilateral Committee to the heads of the parties. A Noor party refuses to participate.
Right. Again, again, the issue of the Renaissance Dam is making headlines, and
it will continue to make headlines.
Indeed, until a resolution or some sort of final report from the committee
which
is agreed
also
upon.
have to be urgent.
Indeed, and Sudan also has a very big standing when it comes to this, because it will also be affected just as much as Egypt.
I don't think they have too much time on their hands.
Indeed.
They have to act quickly.
Indeed. We move to the issue of the judges and the crisis of the judiciary system. We read from Al-Masri Al-Yawm, the revolution of the judges against the massacre of justice. A protest before the Supreme Court today, and the Freedom and Justice Party says we will continue towards legislating the law.
Right, and from Al-Masri Al-Yawm we read the Interior Ministry says securing the peaceful protesters on June 30th. And Nubians join the Tamarrud or rebel movement. This came, or the same issue was tackled also in Al-Akhbar and page 6, and we read the Minister of Interior promises to secure the June 30th demonstrations.
Right, so again, a lot of talk on the June 30th demonstrations and the expectations, and there has been a promise by the Interior Ministry to secure the demonstrations, which I suppose is good that they are aware that there will be demonstrations on the 30th of June, and hopefully action will be taken.
But promises have to be kept.
Indeed. From Al-Akhbar, we read intellects demonstrating with dufuf. I'm not an atheist, I'm an intellect. Huge demonstrations for Egypt's intellects in front of Shajrat al-Dur. The opera repels against the decision of the minister with the national anthem.
Right. This also was tackled in Al-Masri Al-Yawm, and we read Adil Imam says, I feel worried regarding the cultural problem or the cultural crisis. Clashes between supporters and opponents of the Minister of Culture in Zamalek.
Again,
clashes erupted. I think because probably what provoked them were the latest decisions by the current minister of sacking most of the directors of sectors.
Right. Let's move to Turkey. On a regional front, we read a headline from Al-Masri Al-Yawm regarding the recent developments. It says Taksim, Istanbul lifts the atmosphere of Tahrir Square. The revolution of plants unifies the Turks, and protesters clean up the square. Erdogan says, I'm the servant of the people, not its master.
Right. The same issue was tackled in Al-Akhbar, and I guess we're going to play you now a report that's featuring what's happening in Turkey, and we'll continue talking about what's happening in Turkey after the report, so stay with us.
Turkey's government faced growing pressure on Monday after angry demonstrators clashed for a third night with police in a nationwide wave of protests. Police fired tear gas and water cannon on Sunday at protesters who marched on Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan's offices in Istanbul and Ankara. Police had withdrawn on Saturday from Istanbul's main Taksim Square, the symbolic heart of demonstrations that started over an unpopular building project nearby and boiled over into a general protest against the government. Crowds of whistling, flag-waving protesters continued to cover Taksim Square. However, flashpoints shifted late Sunday to the area near Erdogan's nearby Istanbul base. Reporters saw police disperse thousands of demonstrators, and the incidents continued into the early morning. The Interior Minister said earlier that more than 1,700 people had been arrested in the unrest nationwide, though most have since been released. He said 58 civilians and 115 security officers had been injured over several days of protests, although rights groups have put the number of injured at more than 400. Turkey's Western allies have appealed for restraint. The unrest began as a local outcry against plans to redevelop Gezi Park, a rare green spot near Taksim. However, a heavy-handed police response, it quickly snowballed. Accused by critics of pushing an increasingly conservative and authoritarian agenda, Erdogan's government is facing the biggest protest since it took power in 2002.
Well, scenarios are similar everywhere. And our final item comes from Al-Akhbar, and we read the heat wave ends today. The temperatures recorded 43 degrees in the shade on Sunday. The temperatures dropped by 10 degrees today.
Which we have felt, yes indeed. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I guess with that we end our press review for this morning. A quick brief look at all the headlines making local newspapers of the last 24 hours. And now we leave you with Dina Yunus with one of her very exciting and interesting features on ancient Egypt, and we'll be right back to stay tuned.
Hatshepsut, erected